Location: Monte Cassino, Italy. The damp earth clung to my uniform as I inched forward, every muscle in my body tense with anticipation. It was 1943, and the war had dragged on far too long. The bitter taste of gunpowder and the acrid stench of smoke hung in the air, mixing with the scent of freshly turned soil. I was part of the Allied forces trying to break through the Gustav Line in Italy, a line the Germans had fortified to hell and back. Monte Cassino loomed in the distance, its ancient monastery perched atop a rocky hill, now a strategic point of defense for the enemy. My mission was simple: take out the high-ranking officer rumored to be directing the German defense from a hidden vantage point. Every movement was deliberate, calculated. I could feel the rough texture of the camouflage netting covering my helmet, the cool metal of my M1903 Springfield sniper rifle against my chest. This rifle had been my companion through countless missions, its scope my window to a world where life and death were separated by mere millimeters. Why am I here? The question echoed in my mind, not for the first time. Duty, honor, and the hope of a swifter end to this war had brought me here. But deep down, it was the need to protect my brothers in arms, to ensure they made it back home to their families. I paused, listening to the distant rumble of artillery. The enemy was relentless, but so were we. Slowly, I continued my crawl, the rugged terrain tearing at my uniform. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, despite the cold bite of the evening air. Focus. I needed to stay focused. My target was somewhere ahead, hidden among the ruins and rubble. I reached the edge of the cliff, my heart pounding in my chest. The vantage point offered a clear view of the valley below, the enemy positions scattered like ants. I settled into position, every movement measured and precise. My training had drilled into me the importance of patience, of waiting for the perfect moment. I adjusted the scope, my finger resting lightly on the trigger. The officer would appear soon, if the intelligence was correct. As I lay there, the memories of home flooded my mind, the faces of loved ones, the laughter of friends. This was why I fought, why I risked everything. The thought of them kept me grounded, even as the world around me seemed to crumble. The minutes ticked by, and the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. I scanned the area through my scope, noting the positions of enemy soldiers, the layout of their defenses. But something was off. The area where the officer was supposed to be was ominously quiet. Still, too quiet. The thought gnawed at me. There should have been more movement, more signs of life. Instead, it was as if the very air held its breath, waiting. I adjusted my position, trying to get a better angle. My instincts were screaming at me that something wasn't right. The Germans were cunning, and this felt like a trap. But I had my orders, and I couldn't leave without at least confirming the target's location. I watched and waited, every muscle in my body taut with tension. The silence stretched on, the stillness becoming almost unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the pulse in my fingertips as they rested on the rifle's trigger. What are they planning? The question echoed in my mind, unanswered. I had seen this kind of silence before, in the moments before an ambush, before the chaos erupted. It was the calm before the storm. Despite the growing unease, I remained in position, my eyes never leaving the scope. This was my duty, my role in this vast and terrible war, to take the shot that could change the course of a battle. Nightfall had cloaked the valley in darkness, the silence so profound it seemed unnatural. I lay prone on the edge of the cliff, my M1903 Springfield cradled in my arms. The evening air was cold, but sweat trickled down my back, the result of nerves stretched thin and anticipation wound tight. I peered through the scope, scanning the enemy positions below. The stillness was unnerving. Where there should have been movement, there was only silence. My gut told me something was wrong, something beyond the usual horrors of war. Then, movement. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks in the dim light. But no. There were shapes emerging from the shadows, their forms vague and shifting. As they drew closer, the true horror of what I was seeing hit me like a physical blow. They were not human. Dark, twisted figures, grotesque parodies of men and beasts, moved with an unnatural grace. Their eyes glowed with a sickly, unearthly light, and their movements were a hideous blend of fluidity and savagery. I watched in frozen disbelief as they descended upon the German soldiers. The slaughter was instantaneous and brutal. These creatures tore through the soldiers like they were made of paper. Claws, fangs, and other monstrous appendages ripped and slashed, sending sprays of blood and chunks of flesh into the air. The soldiers' screams of terror and agony were quickly silenced, replaced by the wet, sickening sounds of butchery. This can't be real, I thought, my mind reeling. Demons. Actual demons. But the evidence was right there, illuminated by the moonlight and the sporadic flashes of gunfire. One of the creatures, its skin a mottled gray and black, lifted a soldier by the throat, its claws piercing through the man's neck like it was nothing. The soldier gurgled, blood pouring from his mouth before the demon casually ripped his head from his body and tossed it aside. I felt bile rise in my throat, the scene too horrific to comprehend. These weren't just enemies. They were something else entirely, something out of a nightmare. I forced myself to stay focused, to keep watching. This was beyond any mission brief, beyond anything I'd ever trained for. But I had to see, to understand. What the hell is going on? My thoughts were frantic, racing to find some logical explanation, but there was none. These creatures, these demons, were real, and they were here, turning the battlefield into a hellscape. The demons seemed to be enjoying the slaughter, their grotesque faces twisted into expressions of glee. They moved with a sadistic joy, reveling in the destruction they wrought. I shifted my position slightly, trying to get a better view of the scene. The valley was becoming a charnel house, bodies littered everywhere, the ground soaked with blood. The demons showed no signs of stopping, no signs of mercy. One of the demons, larger than the rest, stood still, its head cocked as if listening. Its glowing eyes scanned the area, and for a heart-stopping moment, they seemed to lock onto my position. I held my breath, waiting. The demon's gaze lingered, then moved on. I let out a slow, controlled exhale. Whatever these things were, they weren't invincible. I had to believe that. As I held my breath and lined up my scope, I sent a bullet screaming through the air, the bullet tearing through the demon's skull, molten red blood scorching the demons nearby. The shot was perfect, a direct hit. The demon's head exploded in a spray of burning ichor, its body collapsing to the ground in a grotesque heap. The other demons recoiled, their monstrous faces contorted with rage and confusion. For a brief moment, the valley was still, the air thick with the stench of sulfur and charred flesh. Then, as if driven by a collective fury, the demons turned their glowing eyes toward my position. I had seconds, maybe less, to move. My training kicked in, instincts honed through countless missions taking over. I pulled back from the cliff's edge, moving swiftly and silently. The terrain that had been a challenge to navigate earlier was now an obstacle course I had to master to survive. The demon's guttural roars echoed through the night, a cacophony of rage that sent chills down my spine. I kept low, my body hugging the ground as I moved. Every step, every movement was calculated, designed to minimize noise and avoid detection. I reached a small outcrop of rocks, pausing to catch my breath and assess my surroundings. The demons were on the move, their twisted forms scouring the valley for any sign of their attacker. I could see their glowing eyes scanning the area, searching, hunting. Stay calm. Stay focused. The mantra repeated in my mind, a lifeline in the chaos. I knew the terrain well enough to navigate it even in the dark, but the added threat of the demons made every step a gamble. I moved again, using the shadows and the natural cover to my advantage. The route back to the base was treacherous, but I had no choice. I had to get this information to command, to warn them about the new threat we were facing. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I made my way through the rugged terrain. The sounds of the demon's hunt grew fainter, but I knew better than to let my guard down. I had to assume they were still searching, still hunting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the faint outlines of the Allied encampment. Relief washed over me, but I knew I couldn't relax just yet. I made my way to the perimeter, signaling to the sentries on duty. They recognized me and allowed me to pass. I headed straight for the command tent, my mind racing with the events of the night. I had to report what I had seen, what I had encountered. The war had taken a dark, supernatural turn, and we needed to be prepared. As I entered the tent, the officers inside turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I was about to say. "Sir, you need to hear this," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We've got a new enemy out there, and it's like nothing we've ever faced before." The officers listened, their faces growing more grim with each word. The demons were real, and they were here, turning the battlefield into a hellscape. I stepped out of the tent, the cool night air a welcome relief. I had survived, but I knew that the real fight was just beginning. As I made my way to my tent, I couldn't shake the image of the demons, their glowing eyes and twisted forms. The war had become a battle not just for territory, but for survival against an enemy from our darkest nightmares.